By the year 4300, the Zeeland Empire had swept across the stars like a plague of logic and lasers. Planet after planet had fallen, not by overwhelming brutality, but by calculated assimilation. Resistance was rare. Surrender was logical. Civilizations, some far older than Earth's entire timeline, had bent the knee without firing a single shot. To the Zeelands, war was mathematics, and Earth was an irrelevant footnote. Their data scans showed a chaotic world ruled by primitive bipeds too consumed by tribal conflict, greed, and self-sabotage to pose any threat. The species called humans had spent more time fighting each other than uniting for anything significant. Their military technology was laughably outdated. Nuclear weapons were ancient relics, space travel was barely functional, and even their planet-wide communication was splintered into warring ideologies. A decision was made: Earth would be conquered in 3 days, not out of urgency, but out of boredom. An intelligence drone was dispatched. It studied culture, language, behavior, and warfare. Its conclusion was unanimous with prior findings. Instinct-driven mammals with delusions of importance. One Zeeland strategist mocked the report, saying, "They fight with emotion, not logic. That alone is their doom." The invasion order came not with fanfare, but with apathy. Earth would be catalogued, drained, and processed. No threat assessments were deemed necessary. Commanders viewed the mission as a low-tier sweep. In their minds, this wasn't war. It was cleanup. 3 waves were planned. First, silence global communication grids. Second, disable military infrastructure using targeted electromagnetic pulses. Third, deploy ground units to extract genetic, mineral, and bioresources. Efficiency was the only goal. Civilians would either comply or be neutralized. No resistance was expected. And for the first 18 hours, everything went according to plan. Satellites blinked out like dying stars. Networks collapsed. Cities plunged into darkness. New York, Beijing, Johannesburg, Sao Paulo, all targeted and shut down in synchronized pulses. Panic followed. Earth's military scrambled but found their tech inert, their command lines severed. Fighter jets became paperweights. Nuclear silos were blind. Earth was on its knees. From orbit, the Zeeland commanders observed the chaos with disinterest. One murmured, "They collapse fast." Typical. But within the silence, something ancient stirred, something the drone couldn't detect and no strategist could quantify: will. Human will. Not the kind that marches or salutes, but the kind that crawls through rubble with broken ribs. The kind that hides children in cellars while planting explosives on bridges. The kind that has rewritten history not by surviving, but by refusing to vanish. Across the mountains of Eastern Europe, isolated platoons reactivated dormant Cold War bunkers manually. In South Asia, rural militia groups operated without tech, guided by firelight and instinct. In Africa, nomadic tribes leveraged terrain to ambush scout patrols. Old radios sparked back to life. Handwritten notes replaced satellite pings. Within 36 hours, 12 ground patrols had gone missing. Zeeland algorithms flagged it as terrain interference. By hour 50, something stranger happened. The Empire's neural relay, designed to monitor soldier vitals, began detecting spikes in cortisol and fear before any engagement. Troopers started hesitating before entering cave networks or approaching human ruins. They reported movement they couldn't trace. Whispered sounds. Disappearing squads. One report ended mid-transmission. "We thought they were primitive." Zeeland High Command dismissed these as minor anomalies. One commander, slightly unnerved, said, "They're ghosts now. Playing tricks. Let's finish this." He ordered full deployment. It was a mistake. What they never understood, what they couldn't understand, was that humans were born on a death world. Earth was a planet that punished weakness with extinction. Storms, beasts, disease, war. Humanity had not survived because of its intelligence, but because of its adaptation to pain. The Empire had underestimated a species that had spent millennia killing each other, and in doing so, had unknowingly trained itself for the worst. And under a collapsed city, somewhere in the ruins of what was once called Karachi, a man opened his eyes. No data file mentioned him. No tracker found his heat signature. The scans missed him because they weren't looking for someone buried under concrete for 2 days, his pulse nearly undetectable. But his mind was awake. Focused. Controlled. He did not panic. He listened. Somewhere above, something alien was walking through human ash like a tourist. And that's when it happened, not the birth of resistance, not yet, but something deeper. A shift. A reckoning. They thought Earth would be quiet. They thought humans would beg. They thought wrong. And beneath the rubble, the man didn't scream. He smiled. He had no name in their records. No designation, no rank. Not even a pulse, according to the Zeeland scans that had swept the impact zone. But he was alive, buried beneath steel, dust, and concrete. His chest rose shallowly, mind caught somewhere between memory and instinct. The blast had killed thousands in seconds. He had been standing on the bridge when it fell apart beneath him. Somehow, impossibly, he was still here. He emerged 29 hours after the initial strike, blood dried on his face, left arm dislocated, legs trembling. Yet his steps were measured. Controlled. There was no urgency in him, only certainty. He moved through ash, ignoring collapsed towers and charred bodies. What he searched for wasn't shelter or food, it was clarity. Assessment. Direction. He found it in the ruins of an old defense post, long decommissioned. The codes still worked. Dust covered, stripped of most tech, but there was enough. Manual override. Emergency stores. Fragmented satellite maps. A faint radio hum in the static. He wasn't looking to call for help. He was listening. And he found it. Not words, but fear, intermittent broadcasts from isolated humans, survivors whispering coordinates, confirming enemy positions. They spoke in code older than any AI could decode. His fingers moved without hesitation, replying in a tongue half the world had forgotten. One word returned again and again across frequencies. Echo. His old call sign. He hadn't heard it in decades. They thought he was dead. So did he. But death, he realized, wasn't when your heart stopped. It was when no one remembered your purpose. And now, someone had remembered. They were calling not for rescue, but for leadership. He started moving. Every step was pain. His muscles had softened, reflexes dulled by years of silence. But something deeper had survived, the rhythm of command, the discipline to act under fire, and the memory of what made him dangerous. The Zeeland patrol didn't see him until it was too late. 6 elite scouts, fully armored, cyber-linked, invisibility-enabled. They approached casually, unaware of who they faced. In 22 seconds they were down. He didn't use plasma or drones. Just precision, timing, and what the enemy lacked, instinct unfiltered by code. He left one alive. Not by mercy, but to send a message. And the message was received. Across Zeeland command channels, chatter shifted. For the first time, they used a term not found in their lexicon, anomaly. Something outside prediction. An entity behaving beyond parameters. One squad claimed he moved between shadows too fast for sensors. Another said his presence jammed their comms. A commander demanded proof. The next recon team vanished entirely. The Empire increased local forces. More drones. More scouts. But the problem wasn't scale. It was asymmetry. They fought with algorithms. He fought with experience. They relied on shared vision. He relied on unpredictability. They had coordination. He had chaos. And he wasn't alone for long. His actions didn't inspire hope. They reignited memory. Veterans who had once served beside Echo recognized the method. Survivors tracked the pattern. Whispers turned to trails, trails into movements. Without words, without orders, a network reformed itself. Old soldiers, street fighters, tacticians, exiled thinkers. Not to create a new army, but to follow the one man who never stopped fighting. He didn't seek followers. He didn't declare cause. He simply moved with a purpose no one else remembered, and that was enough. The Empire tried psyops. Broadcasts promising safety. Offers of assimilation. Even impersonations using cloned speech. None worked. People no longer needed motivation. They needed a reason. And Echo was that reason. He infiltrated a Xenon field lab and destroyed the memory core that held Earth's genetic catalog. Not for science. For denial. If they couldn't map humanity, they couldn't break it. He targeted supply drops, not to steal, but to contaminate. Their machines started failing midair. Their maps, once flawless, began reporting terrain errors. They believed their systems compromised. They were right. But what they didn't know, what no report ever captured, was why it worked. Because Echo wasn't fighting alone. He was fighting with every survivor who remembered a street that no longer existed. Every child who learned to stay quiet. Every medic who refused to abandon a bleeding stranger. These weren't soldiers. They were remnants. Yet under Echo's influence, they became a force. Not organized. Not armed. But dangerous. The Empire sent a combat AI to analyze the pattern. It couldn't find one. Not because there wasn't one, but because it was human. Improvised. Unstable. Alive. And the AI reported back with a singular conclusion. This subject is not an anomaly. He is a variable. Echo heard that, intercepted from a scrambled relay. He smiled for the first time in days. They were starting to understand. They were no longer asking where he was. They were asking what he was. Initial labels, insurgent, remnant, local irregular, were dropped. None applied. He operated without logistics, backup, or support infrastructure. Yet wherever he appeared, Xenon patrols vanished. Data feeds spiked with contradictory reports. A single figure acting across zones that should have been days apart. It violated movement models. Surveillance couldn't trace him. Drones would pick up motion, but lose it before impact. One command unit issued a classified warning. Subject capable of intentional signal scrambling without tech. It wasn't true. But fear made it believable. Xenon Command underestimated the effect of a story. Their system thrived on certainty, data, metrics, probabilities. But now they faced something without coordinates. They couldn't track Echo, so they began tracking the panic. Fear spread faster than orders. Troops delayed deployments. Convoys rerouted unnecessarily. Civilians under Xenon authority began resisting, emboldened by fragments of intercepted broadcasts. Echo never spoke directly. He let actions create the legend. He broke into a military relay station and accessed their internal comm grid. Not to shut it down, but to transmit a short phrase in hundreds of languages. 3 words. Always the same. I am awake. The signal lasted 8 seconds. That was enough. Within hours, sectors once dormant came alive with resistance. Humans who had accepted defeat began moving. Not because they believed they could win, but because something ancient had reawakened, the belief that fear can be reversed. Not erased. Redirected. The Xelons tried to adjust. They launched localized neural dampeners. Broadcasted disinformation campaigns. Staged fake captures using generated avatars. Claimed Echo had been killed. But each time, real footage surfaced of him disabling command posts, disabling drop ships, walking into occupied zones and vanishing again. Their fabrications only fueled the myth. Soon their own soldiers stopped trusting official updates. One platoon refused deployment unless biological scans confirmed Echo wasn't in the area. Another installed unauthorized detection systems specifically to spot human anomalies. These weren't official terms. But they spread through whispers, embedded in unit slang. Echo had become a virus, not of flesh, but of narrative. The Xelon Intelligence Corps conducted psychological threat evaluations. Echo's profile was rated destabilizing at exponential scale. Recommendations were issued to avoid direct engagement unless supported by full orbital oversight. Even then, risk was considered unacceptable. They didn't know if he could be killed. What terrified them more was the possibility he didn't care. In one sector, a Zeeland general executed 3 of his own lieutenants for suggesting retreat. In another, an entire base was evacuated after Echo's name was spray-painted on the walls, though no human had been sighted within 300 miles. The Empire didn't understand how quickly belief could weaponize. Echo did. He wasn't waging war in the traditional sense. He was dismantling perception. Authority relies on belief in its invincibility. He targeted that belief with surgical precision. Every action calculated not just for impact, but for message. A detonated armory wasn't about loss of supply. It was proof the enemy wasn't untouchable. A hacked transmission wasn't just disruption. It was personal. He made them feel watched. They began overcorrecting. Security doubled. Patrols moved in packs. Drones circled empty terrain, burning energy for no reason. The Empire started suffocating under its own fear responses. And Echo kept moving, never predictable, never repeating tactics. He didn't lead with strength. He led with doubt. Even Earth's scattered remnants began to reorganize. Not into armies, but into cells, disconnected but thematically aligned. Echo had no command. Yet his influence dictated their rhythm. He never met most of them. He didn't need to. His presence validated their instincts. The Empire started interrogating civilians for connections. Torture protocols activated. Yet no one gave him up. Because no one had him. He belonged to no base, no sector, no chain of command. He had become an abstraction. And abstractions don't bleed. At a high-level briefing, Zeeland tacticians requested permission to escalate. Orbital strikes. Erasure-level countermeasures. The proposal was denied. Central Command issued a verdict. Containment must remain localized. Full deployment signals vulnerability. They couldn't afford to acknowledge he was a threat. Echo used that blind spot. He accessed their inner code, deep layer AI routing. Not to destroy, but to send a message directly through their own encrypted channel, used only for inter-empire emergencies. The message contained no threats. Just a recording. It was his voice. Calm. Even. You measured our tools. Not our will. That was your first mistake. There was no trace of origin. The signal deleted itself after transmission. Panic followed. Top-level silence was ordered. But among mid-ranks, the damage was done. If he could breach that, what couldn't he reach? Echo didn't seek total destruction. He sought disruption, of thought, of order, of identity. And the Zeelands, for all their superiority, were now fractured, not by loss of life, but by the fear that they had misunderstood their enemy entirely. He hadn't made them bleed. He made them doubt their place in the galaxy. He didn't call for them. They came anyway. Not out of loyalty or command, but because instinct pulled them forward. Survivors from collapsed cities. Retired operatives once buried in bureaucracy. Farmers who had never held a weapon. Engineers whose tools became sabotage. Each one moved because something inside them refused silence. Echo had ignited something older than strategy. Resolve star. The groups didn't organize in traditional terms. No formal leadership, no centralized supply lines. But a pattern emerged. Secure zones began appearing, not marked on any map. Underground caches, coded transmissions, shared tactics built around unpredictability. They studied Echo's moves, mimicked his methods. Strike hard, vanish fast. Hit the weak points, not the strongholds. Turn every blind spot into an opportunity. They weren't trying to win a war. They were making it costly. Zeeland logistics started to degrade. Supply routes that were once guaranteed became traps. Drop ships rerouted constantly to avoid ground-level interference. Even basic resource extraction slowed. Resistance fighters didn't attack in waves. They disrupted the rhythm. Their focus wasn't domination. It was exhaustion. One unit in Eastern Ridge Sector infiltrated a fusion depot. Not to destroy it, but to reroute its output into a feedback loop, forcing emergency shutdowns across 3 regions. Another rewired abandoned communication towers to broadcast decoy signals. They knew the Empire would trace the noise, waste time, drain fuel, deploy drones to hunt ghosts. Every move pulled a thread from the Empire's tightly knit control. What shocked Xelan Command was the discipline. These weren't chaotic rebels burning for vengeance. Their strikes were coordinated, efficient, cold. They didn't celebrate hits or mourn losses publicly. There were no public broadcasts, no martyrdoms. Just action. Retreat. Repeat. The silence made them terrifying. Machines were predictable. This wasn't. The Empire attempted countermeasures, environmental traps, sensor layers, programmed ambushes, but they failed. Not because the tech was flawed, but because the humans didn't follow expected behavior. They didn't seek territory or defend fixed positions. They moved in response to impact, not orders. They learned. Echo didn't give them plans. He gave them examples. Every encounter with him refined their understanding of timing, terrain, and psychological advantage. He didn't just dismantle the enemy. He taught others how. Soon, even unarmed civilians began altering the equation. A janitor sabotaged a Xelan transport engine with nothing but a loose panel. A child dropped a mirrored shard into a patrol scanner, reflecting its own heat signature and triggering an alert. The fight had bled into daily life. Everyone adapted. Everyone contributed. Xelan operatives began experiencing uncertainty. They stopped trusting their sensors. Hesitated at intersections. Delayed routine sweeps. Efficiency dropped without a single direct confrontation. Control was slipping, not because of firepower, but because every layer of their process faced unpredictable interference. Echo understood that. He didn't scale operations. He scaled ideas. One well-placed shift in logic could disable a system more permanently than any explosion. The Empire, desperate to regain initiative, launched shock zones, areas flooded with firepower and drones meant to demoralize. They succeeded in damage, but not in deterrence. Each new attack simply confirmed what humans already believed, that surrender was never an option. The resistance began anticipating these strikes. They led the Empire into their own destruction. Mines planted where heavy units would naturally retreat. Thermal decoys placed in dense foliage to mislead drone targeting. Even terrain was used strategically. Flooded tunnels, landslide zones, echo chambers turned into natural signal distorters. Xelan reports turned frantic. Field units burned through resources at 4 times the projected rate. Rest cycles were shortened, yet morale continued to decay. Descriptions of phantom pressure appeared in logs. The threat wasn't always present, but never absent. Soldiers confessed waking from sleep expecting confrontation. Anxiety became protocol. The Empire's leadership failed to realize they weren't losing to superior tactics. They were unraveling under unrelenting unpredictability. The humans weren't following a plan, they were becoming one. Echo made no speeches. He issued no commands. His presence alone was the structure. His trail carved corridors others could walk through. Not because he was infallible, but because he had proven one unshakable truth: systems built on assumption collapse under adaptation. By week 9, the Resistance had infiltrated a major Xelan data hub and disabled its forecasting AI. The damage wasn't physical, it was epistemic. The enemy lost predictive capacity. Without models, their precision faltered. Targets were missed. Patrols wandered off script. Strategy became guesswork. And still, Echo moved. He wasn't a leader in the traditional sense. He was a compass, pointing forward. His presence meant survival was possible. Resistance wasn't reaction. It was evolution. And now, the Empire wasn't fighting humanity. It was fighting what humanity became when pushed past the edge. It ended the way empires never imagine it can, quietly. No massive final battle. No surrender ceremony. No burning flags or triumphant speeches. Just a slow, irreversible decay in command clarity. Directives lost coherence. Response times lagged. Operational cohesion, once perfect, fractured under the weight of too many variables no longer fitting expected models. The Xelon High Command issued reallocation orders, redirecting core fleets to contain and reassess. But containment requires understanding. And that had been lost. They didn't understand the opposition anymore, because it wasn't centralized, it wasn't organized, and it wasn't static. It had adapted. The decision to withdraw came not from a moment of defeat, but from silence. Multiple forward bases ceased transmitting within a 48-hour window. No confirmed strikes. No alarms. Just absence. Investigation units sent to recover them vanished in sequence. Chain of control broke not through conflict, but vacuum. Nothingness became the Resistance's most potent weapon. Within weeks, the Empire began recalling its assets. Quietly, without public admission. Entire squadrons reassigned. Extractor ships left mid-operation. The narrative shifted from domination to redirection. Official channels labeled Earth as high volatility, low return. Internal memos classified the planet as incompatible with efficient resource capture. But the truth was clear. They had been rejected. Not by force. By rejection of compliance. Echo never issued a final command. He didn't appear for victory. There was no message. No claim. He simply stopped moving. No one knew if he died, disappeared, or chose to vanish. But his absence said everything. His work was done. What he sparked had taken root, and no longer required him. The Resistance didn't celebrate. There was no parade, no unified response. People returned to what remained. Rebuilt without instruction. Survivors emerged not as victors, but as witnesses to the collapse of certainty. And that, more than anything, rewrote the balance. Xelon records now refer to the event as the variable campaign. Military academies avoid teaching it. Strategy databases omit Earth data sets. Not by accident, but design. They couldn't explain it within their frameworks. A loss without a battlefield. An enemy without an army. Outcomes shaped by behaviors their algorithms couldn't classify. Among classified files, one name is locked under restricted access, Echo. His profile remains incomplete. No origin. No biometric match. Just fragments, excerpts of intercepted messages, incident maps, behavioral anomalies. A record of influence far disproportionate to scale. What remains most unsettling to their analysts is his final known transmission. A singular phrase embedded inside the Empire's highest priority command channel. You never understood the shape of our fire. There was no context. No location data. No follow-up. The phrase became an internal term among some younger officers. Asterisk the fire problem. Asterisk it symbolized threat without form. Power without structure. And above all, the danger of misreading the human equation. Back on Earth, the myth persisted. Echo became legend not because of what he did, but because of what he revealed. He exposed the fragility of overwhelming force. He demonstrated that resilience doesn't need hierarchy. That a fractured people can unify through shared resistance, not shared governance. He didn't become a god. He didn't ask for worship. He proved divinity was never the goal. He reminded humanity of its own reflection, flawed, impulsive, inconsistent, but capable of impossible resistance when purpose exceeds survival. Children in survivor enclaves learned his name not as a hero, but as a question. What would Echo do? Not to mimic him, but to reconsider the path ahead. He wasn't a path. He was a spark. The remnants of the Xelon fleet never returned. Satellites stopped scanning Earth. Border probes were decommissioned. And a system that once believed in universal conquest adjusted its policy to include a new classification, species to be avoided. Echo rewrote more than a battle. He rewrote threat perception. He redefined what resistance could mean. He proved that victory isn't always about overwhelming the opponent. Sometimes, it's about being unbreakable enough that the opponent decides you're no longer worth the cost. And for a species once dismissed as irrelevant, that realization was enough. Because the man the galaxy mistook for something divine had never claimed power. He had simply remembered who he was. Just a soldier. Just a human. And that, in the end, was more than enough.